It began as a hushed conversation behind Windsor Castle walls that aides tried to dismiss and courtiers quietly buried. But the tense expressions seen leaving that private gathering told a story the palace could no longer contain. What first sounded like another passing rumor soon evolved into a battle over a royal inheritance that few believed even existed. And at the center of it all stood Lady Louise. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For days, very little escaped the walls surrounding that confidential gathering. Senior aides avoided questions, palace insiders remained unusually guarded, and even longtime royal correspondents noticed that something felt different. According to reports circulating among royal observers, Princess Anne and Prince Edward had quietly joined royal trustees for a series of discussions that were never intended to become public. At first, many dismissed the unusual meetings as routine matters involving family finances. But whispers soon began spreading through royal circles that the issue at hand was far more sensitive than anyone had imagined. Hidden somewhere inside archives untouched for years, documents connected to a forgotten estate had suddenly become the center of urgent legal reviews. As speculation intensified, the atmosphere surrounding the matter grew increasingly tense. Palace officials reportedly received instructions to avoid discussing the issue publicly, an unusual level of caution that only fueled curiosity. Questions emerged about promises made decades earlier, expectations formed over time, and whether assumptions quietly held by some members of the extended royal family had any legal standing whatsoever. Royal legal advisors were said to be moving with remarkable urgency, examining records and consulting trustees whose names rarely appear in headlines. It was this sudden activity that first caught the attention of experienced palace watchers, many of whom sensed that something much bigger was unfolding behind closed doors. Then came the name that began appearing in whispered conversations: Lady Louise. For years, she had maintained a life far removed from the turbulence and drama that often surrounded the monarchy. Yet insiders increasingly pointed toward her as the unexpected figure standing at the center of a remarkable discovery. Few understood why. Fewer still knew what had been uncovered. But one thing had become impossible to ignore. The discussions taking place were not about ordinary property or simple financial arrangements. They involved history, legacy, and decisions that reached back across generations. And as rumors continued to spread, one troubling question hung over everything. Had long-held expectations quietly collided with written intentions that had remained hidden for years? Those closest to the institution understood that if the answer proved to be yes, the consequences would extend far beyond one family member or one estate. Because suddenly, old tensions that many believed had disappeared forever seemed to be stirring once again beneath the surface. But the shocking discovery wasn't simply about an estate. It threatened to reopen old divisions that many believed had already been settled. For years, the estate existed almost like a forgotten chapter in royal history. Protected by tradition and wrapped in secrecy, its true significance remained hidden from public view. Yet once archivists revisited the records, it became clear that this was never just another property. It represented something far greater, a legacy carefully preserved across generations. As questions surrounding Lady Louise continued to spread throughout royal circles, attention slowly shifted away from whispered meetings and toward the mysterious inheritance itself. Those familiar with royal history understood that certain properties were never measured simply by their market value. They represented continuity. They symbolized loyalty. And according to longtime palace observers, this particular estate had occupied a unique place within the monarchy's private history for decades. Its name had rarely surfaced in public discussions, earning it an almost mythical reputation among historians, who referred to it as one of the family's most closely guarded treasures. Some even described it as a forbidden estate, not because access was impossible, but because conversations about its future had always remained behind firmly closed doors. The deeper researchers explored its origins, the more extraordinary the story became. The estate itself reportedly carried connections stretching back generations, with traditions surrounding it carefully maintained by successive monarchs. But many insiders believe that its importance reached an entirely different level during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Throughout her 70 years on the throne, the late Queen became known for thinking far beyond the present moment. Again and again, she focused on preserving stability, protecting tradition, and ensuring that decisions made in one generation would continue to serve the monarchy long after she was gone. According to various reports, this estate formed part of that larger vision. It was never intended to be viewed merely as land or wealth. Instead, it represented a symbol of continuity, responsibility, and quiet service. For years, assumptions concerning future beneficiaries quietly circulated among royal watchers. Names were occasionally mentioned, expectations formed, and theories developed. Yet much of that speculation rested on little more than rumor and interpretation. What few people realized was that special trust arrangements may have been established decades earlier, long before recent debates ever emerged. Palace insiders reportedly became increasingly interested in old legal frameworks that had largely been ignored, while historians revisited correspondence and records that had not attracted serious attention in years. Suddenly, forgotten archives became the center of growing fascination, and as more details surfaced, one truth became increasingly impossible to ignore. This estate carried significance that extended far beyond financial considerations. It represented heritage, it embodied duty. It stood as a bridge connecting generations of royal history, which was precisely why the renewed examination of its records created such unease among those who understood what might be hidden within. Because if Queen Elizabeth had indeed left behind carefully structured instructions concerning its future, then decades of assumptions could be overturned overnight, and quietly, almost unnoticed at first, that possibility was beginning to terrify some while astonishing others. But buried inside those forgotten records was a detail that would transform quiet speculation into a full-scale royal controversy. Whispers surrounding the younger generation had circulated for years, but few imagined they would eventually collide with one of the monarchy's most sensitive inheritances. Behind closed doors, expectations reportedly grew, creating assumptions that some believed were already settled. Yet history had a very different story waiting to emerge. As interest surrounding the mysterious estate intensified, attention gradually shifted away from ancient records and toward the future generations of the royal family. For years, speculation had quietly surrounded the place younger royals might one day occupy within the institution. Among those discussions were reports involving Princess Lilibet and the possibility of future connections to royal legacies that stretched far beyond titles alone. Although much of that speculation remained unofficial, assumptions have a remarkable way of taking on lives of their own. Over time, rumors become expectations become beliefs, and beliefs can eventually create tensions that few people ever intended. According to palace observers, that dangerous transformation was precisely what some senior figures feared was beginning to unfold. At the heart of the growing debate lay an issue far older than any modern family disagreement. It was the eternal question of bloodlines, succession, and inheritance traditions that have shaped the monarchy for centuries. Supporters of various interpretations pointed to changing times and evolving relationships. Others quietly insisted that tradition and established frameworks could not simply be rewritten by public sentiment or media. Speculation, and somewhere between those competing perspectives, confusion began to grow, because what people believed should happen and what official arrangements actually dictated were not necessarily the same thing. Behind palace walls, that distinction reportedly became increasingly sensitive. Senior figures understood that misunderstandings surrounding inheritance carried consequences far beyond individual disappointment. The monarchy itself depended upon clarity, continuity, and stability. Any perception of uncertainty could trigger unnecessary divisions at a time when unity remained more important than ever. According to insiders, those concerns became even more urgent as media attention surrounding younger members of the family continued to intensify. Every appearance, every comment, and every rumor became fuel for endless speculation. Questions multiplied, expectations expanded. Yet very few people possessed access to the documents that mattered most, and therein lay the problem. Much of the public discussion had been built upon assumptions rather than legal realities. Palace historians and longtime royal commentators quietly warned that expectations formed through headlines and interpretations often carried no official authority whatsoever. Some believed future arrangements had already been decided. Others remained convinced that private understandings existed beyond public knowledge. But as trustees continued examining records left behind across generations, a different picture was reportedly beginning to emerge. One that threatened to overturn years of speculation and replace comforting assumptions with uncomfortable truths. Because while many outside observers focused on possibilities, those entrusted with safeguarding the institution had become increasingly interested in something far less emotional and far more powerful: the written intentions hidden inside the archives themselves. But while assumptions multiplied, the people guarding the monarchy were quietly preparing to reveal what the documents actually said. When uncertainty threatened to overwhelm tradition, two of the monarchy's most dependable figures reportedly moved with remarkable determination. Known for placing duty above emotion, they understood that hesitation could invite chaos, and according to insiders, the time for silence had finally come to an end. As speculation surrounding the mysterious estate continued to intensify, attention increasingly focused on two figures whose reputations had been forged not through headlines, but through decades of loyalty and unwavering service. Princess Anne and Prince Edward had rarely sought the spotlight, yet throughout moments of uncertainty, both had earned respect as steady guardians of the institution. For Anne especially, protecting royal traditions had never been a matter of convenience. It was a responsibility she carried with fierce determination. Time and again, she had demonstrated an extraordinary willingness to place duty above emotion, tradition above personal feelings, and stability above temporary popularity. Those who knew the inner workings of the monarchy understood that whenever difficult questions emerged, Anne's voice carried enormous weight. At the same time, Prince Edward found himself navigating a far more personal dimension of the growing controversy. Throughout the years, his close relationship with Lady Louise had become one of the most admired bonds within the family. Unlike many royal stories filled with public disagreements and endless speculation, theirs had remained remarkably private, built on affection, trust, and mutual respect. That relationship made the unfolding developments particularly sensitive. According to palace observers, Edward understood better than anyone how important it was that emotions never overshadowed the intentions left behind by previous generations. The issue had become larger than family expectations. It had become a matter of preserving confidence in the monarchy itself. Reports soon emerged of renewed meetings involving trustees, legal advisors, and senior figures entrusted with overseeing royal arrangements. Quietly and methodically, old inheritance structures were subjected to fresh examination. Every clause, every letter, and every recommendation was reportedly reviewed with extraordinary care. The objective was not to create conflict, but to prevent future disputes before they could take root. Senior figures understood that uncertainty had the power to divide families and weaken institutions. They also understood something equally important. Queen Elizabeth II had devoted her life to ensuring continuity, and those closest to her legacy believed her wishes deserved both respect and protection. Behind closed doors, discussions reportedly became increasingly decisive. Insiders claimed that recommendations were finally presented after months of careful examination. There would be no room for ambiguity, no opportunity for misunderstanding. Whatever conclusions emerged would need to withstand scrutiny, preserve stability, and honor the intentions of the late Queen. Even seasoned palace advisors recognized the extraordinary significance of the moment. Because after years of assumptions and months of growing speculation, the guardians of tradition appeared ready to reveal answers that could reshape everything people believed they knew. And as anticipation quietly spread throughout royal circles, even those who considered themselves impossible to surprise sensed that something remarkable was about to be revealed. But the contents of those recommendations would leave even seasoned palace's observers stunned. It was a revelation few had anticipated. Hidden within carefully preserved records lay instructions that insiders say removed nearly all uncertainty. Suddenly, years of rumors, expectations, and assumptions collided with something far more powerful: written intentions that could no longer be ignored. For months, speculation had dominated conversations surrounding the mysterious estate. Rumors flourished. Competing theories gained momentum. Assumptions hardened into expectations. Yet while much of the public debate focused on possibilities, a very different process had been unfolding behind closed doors. According to palace insiders, archivists tasked with revisiting decades-old records made a discovery that immediately transformed the atmosphere surrounding the entire matter. Documents that had received little attention for years were reportedly uncovered and subjected to renewed examination. What initially appeared to be routine paperwork quickly revealed itself to be something far more significant. Buried among carefully preserved records were instructions whose importance could no longer be dismissed. Those closest to the review process understood the gravity of the moment. Trustees and legal advisors reportedly began studying the language with extraordinary care, determined to eliminate even the smallest uncertainty. Every clause was examined, every provision was scrutinized. There could be no room for interpretation where history, legacy, and family expectations were concerned. According to various reports, the wording itself carried remarkable clarity. Rather than creating confusion, it provided direction. Rather than encouraging speculation, it offered certainty. And slowly, the answer that had remained hidden for so long began to emerge. At the center of that answer stood Lady Louise. For years, she had remained far from the endless controversies that often surrounded royal affairs. Yet according to palace sources, the documents confirmed her position regarding the estate with a degree of certainty that surprised even experienced observers. Suddenly, assumptions that had circulated for years encountered something far stronger than rumors or expectations. They encountered written intentions left behind by those entrusted with safeguarding the institution. Reports soon followed suggesting that competing claims and long-standing assumptions lacked any formal standing under the arrangements established. Decades earlier, what some had viewed as possibilities were, according to insiders, never supported by the records themselves. The response inside royal circles was immediate. Palace figures reportedly described the outcome as definitive, emphasizing that the purpose of the decision had never been about favoritism or personal preference. Instead, senior advisors stressed continuity, stability, and respect for the wishes carefully preserved across generations. For those who had devoted their lives to protecting the monarchy, the issue extended far beyond property. It was about preserving trust in the institution itself. Many viewed the decision as a necessary safeguard against future uncertainty and a reaffirmation of traditions that had endured for centuries. Yet despite the apparent clarity of the findings, not everyone emerged untouched by the outcome. Because while written intentions may settle legal questions, they cannot erase emotions, they cannot silence disappointment, and they certainly cannot prevent old wounds from resurfacing. As news of the revelations quietly spread through royal circles, another chapter of the story was beginning to unfold, one shaped not by documents or trustees but by feelings, expectations, and consequences no one could easily predict. But while the inheritance question appeared resolved, the emotional consequences inside the family were only beginning. The decision may have settled legal questions, but emotionally, the consequences were far more complicated. As word spread through royal circles, reactions reportedly ranged from quiet acceptance to deep disappointment. What had started as a private matter was now becoming impossible to contain. Although the documents appeared to provide clarity, they could not shield the family from the emotional shockwaves that inevitably followed. Within palace walls, conversations reportedly became more frequent, more cautious, and increasingly delicate. According to insiders, what had once been confined to confidential discussions among trustees and advisors was now quietly making its way into wider royal circles. Some accepted the outcome with understanding, recognizing that the intentions preserved within the records deserved respect regardless of personal feelings. Others, however, were said to be struggling with the emotional weight of expectations that had developed over many years. After all, disappointment often arrives not because promises were broken, but because assumptions had become so deeply rooted that they eventually felt like certainties. Reports of mixed reactions soon began attracting attention from palace observers and royal commentators alike. While some family members reportedly viewed the developments as a natural consequence of long-standing arrangements, others were said to be saddened by the divisions that speculation had created. Yet despite those emotions, senior figures understood that allowing disappointment to evolve into conflict would serve no one. There was a growing awareness that perceptions mattered almost as much as reality itself. At a time when the institution faced constant scrutiny, the last thing anyone wanted was for private disagreements to become public controversies. Outside the palace, renewed interest in royal inheritance traditions quickly captured media attention. Historians revisited earlier examples from previous generations. Commentators debated the difference between expectations and legal authority. Headlines focused on questions that many had never considered before. How were these decisions made? Who held responsibility for preserving them? And perhaps most importantly, what happened when modern assumptions collided with traditions established decades earlier? Suddenly, an issue that had begun with one estate had expanded into a broader conversation about the monarchy itself and the delicate balance between continuity and change. Behind the scenes, senior aides reportedly worked tirelessly to prevent unnecessary tensions from escalating. Their objective was simple but enormously difficult: preserve unity, protect relationships, prevent emotions from overwhelming reason. According to palace sources, there was a shared understanding that no family emerged from such revelations entirely untouched. Feelings of sadness, frustration, and confusion were perhaps unavoidable. Yet preserving harmony remained essential, because while documents could determine inheritances, they could not repair strained bonds or erase the lingering effects of disappointment. And that reality raised an even deeper concern. What would these developments mean in the years ahead? Would old assumptions quietly fade with time, or would their consequences continue influencing family relationships long into the future? Those questions remained unanswered, because as emotions continued to ripple through royal circles, many were beginning to realize that this story had never been solely about an estate. Hidden beneath the personal reactions was something far greater, something capable of shaping the institution itself for generations to come. But beyond the personal emotions lay a much larger issue, one involving the future identity of the monarchy itself. For much of her life, Lady Louise remained outside the spotlight, quietly avoiding the drama that often surrounded the monarchy. Yet fate appeared to place her at the center of a story that touched history, duty, and legacy itself. Suddenly, her importance within the royal narrative seemed impossible to ignore. As debates surrounding the inheritance continued to echo through royal circles, many people found themselves looking beyond the controversy itself and focusing instead on the young woman whose name had unexpectedly become linked to one of the monarchy's most closely guarded legacies. Unlike so many figures who had become defined by headlines and public battles, Lady Louise had spent most of her life following a remarkably different path. Those who had observed her over the years often spoke of her humility, her discretion, and her determination to remain grounded despite being born into extraordinary circumstances. While others found themselves pulled into endless speculation, she appeared content to live quietly, avoiding unnecessary attention and embracing a life guided by responsibility rather than recognition. Perhaps that was one reason why her relationship with Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip attracted such admiration. Throughout their later years, the late monarch and the Duke of Edinburgh were said to have shared a particularly close bond with their granddaughter. Their affection was evident to those around them, not because it was constantly discussed, but because it was built on mutual respect and genuine warmth. Prince Philip, especially, was believed to have recognized qualities in Lady Louise that reminded him of earlier generations, qualities rooted in patience, modesty, and an appreciation for duty. Those values, carefully passed down through decades of service, seemed to resonate deeply with the young royal who had never sought fame or prominence. It was precisely this quiet approach that earned her growing admiration among the public. In an era dominated by constant attention and endless commentary, many saw something refreshing in her refusal to chase the spotlight. Royal historians even began drawing comparisons with previous generations who had embraced service without demanding recognition. To some observers, Lady Louise represented something increasingly rare. She embodied the belief that responsibility mattered more than celebrity and that commitment carried greater weight than status. That perception only strengthened as the inheritance controversy unfolded. What had initially appeared to be a dispute over property gradually evolved into something far more profound. Increasingly, commentators and palace insiders alike began speaking of continuity. They saw in Lady Louise a bridge connecting the traditions of the past with the uncertainties of the future. Her story, they argued, demonstrated that the monarchy's strength had never depended solely upon grandeur or public acclaim. Instead, it rested upon individuals willing to serve quietly and place the institution above themselves. That belief resonated deeply with those who feared that modern pressures had begun overshadowing the principles that had sustained the crown for generations. And perhaps that was the greatest irony of all. At the center of a controversy involving inheritance and expectation stood someone who had never appeared interested in either, which was why many believed this chapter carried a message far larger than one estate or one decision. It was a reminder that true significance is often found not in ambition, but in character. And as people reflected upon everything that had unfolded, their thoughts increasingly returned to the woman whose influence continued to shape the monarchy long after her passing. But perhaps the most remarkable lesson of all wasn't about wealth or property. It was about the values Queen Elizabeth spent a lifetime defending. In the end, the controversy surrounding the estate revealed something much deeper than competing expectations. It exposed the enduring power of legacy itself, because while fashions change and headlines fade, the principles that shape the monarchy continue to influence decisions long after their architects are gone. As the emotions slowly subsided and the endless speculation began losing momentum, many observers found themselves reflecting on a truth that had quietly guided the monarchy through generations of triumph and turmoil. Long after Queen Elizabeth II's passing, her influence remained unmistakable. Throughout 7 decades of service, she devoted her life to preserving stability and ensuring that future generations would inherit not merely titles and properties, but values rooted in responsibility and continuity. Time and again, she emphasized the importance of thinking beyond the present moment. And in many ways, the events surrounding the estate seemed to demonstrate that her vision had not faded with time. Instead, it continued to shape decisions from beyond the headlines, reminding everyone that legacy is measured not by popularity, but by endurance. That lesson carried enormous significance. Throughout history, the monarchy had survived wars, scandals, crises, and periods of uncertainty, because each generation understood the importance of preserving traditions entrusted to them by those who came before. Individual personalities may come and go, but institutions endure because they are built upon principles greater than any one person. According to royal historians, that commitment to continuity has always been the foundation upon which the crown rests. And while assumptions can change and public opinion can shift, written intentions possess a permanence that emotions alone cannot overcome. That reality ultimately became one of the defining themes of the entire story. For many, Lady Louise's inheritance came to represent something far greater than land or financial value. It became a symbol of patience, a symbol of humility, a symbol of the belief that duty quietly performed often carries greater weight than ambition loudly displayed. Throughout the controversy, her conduct reflected the very qualities that previous generations had spent their lives defending. In that sense, the estate itself became secondary. What truly mattered was the message left behind by those who had shaped its future. A message centered on service, responsibility, and the understanding that genuine significance is earned over time rather than claimed through expectation. Perhaps that is why the institution emerged stronger than many had anticipated. Internal challenges have always existed within royal families. Disagreements are inevitable. Emotions are unavoidable. Yet history has repeatedly shown that the monarchy possesses an extraordinary ability to adapt without abandoning the principles that define it. What began as a controversy over inheritance ultimately became a reminder of the resilience that has allowed the institution to endure for centuries. And in the eyes of many observers, this chapter may one day be remembered not for the tensions it created, but for the values it reaffirmed. Because in the end, the story was never truly about who expected what. It was about the quiet power of duty, the wisdom of patience, and the enduring influence of those who understood that preserving the future sometimes requires decisions that are not always immediately understood. And as memories of the controversy gradually faded, one lesson remained stronger than ever. And as the dust slowly settled, one truth became impossible to deny. The greatest royal legacies are never measured by claims but by the enduring triumph of duty over expectation. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.